ខែធ្នូ2010អានឹងបានន័យជាកម្ដៅមួយខ្លាំងជាទីបំផុតដែលមិនអាចបំភ្លេចបានក្នុងជីវិតរបស់យើងរៀងខ្លួនអញ្ចឹងសូមផ្ដាំទៅអាសែនកុំបង្ខំចិត្តអញសារជាថ្មីកុំបង្ខំចិត្តអញដើម្បីឲ្យអញសម្រេចចិត្តសម្លាប់គុំគូសារអញទាំងពូអញប្រាប់អញត្រង់ថាយើងមានសមត្ថភាពមានច្បាប់ដើម្បីសម្លាប់អញពេញច្បាប់ជាអន្តរជាតិអត់មានបញ្ហាទន្ទឹមនឹងអាយុនឹងអាចិនក៏អាចជួយអញបានដែរព្រោះសប្តាហ៍ថ្ងៃយើងចង់អ្វីទាំងអស់ដែលអញបាននឹងស្រាប់ឯតាទន្ទឹមនឹងអាយុក៏នៅក្នុងកិច្ចការបើមិនចង់មានបញ្ហាក្នុងប្រទេសទេវាដែរទី1សង្គ្រាមស៊ីវិលយើងអាចធ្វើការទី2ទំនប់ហាយហ្វុងយើងធ្វើការទី3ចាមទូទាំងពិភពលោកគេដើម្បីទាមទារយកទឹកដីនគរចម្ប៉ារបស់គេមកវិញទៀតហើយទន្ទឹមនឹងអញដឹងច្បាស់លាស់ទៅចាមពិភពលោកហ្នឹងប្រជាពលរដ្ឋប្រមាណហើយដែរចឹងបានយើងចង់ផ្ដាំអញកុំសូវខ្លាំងពេកកុំអួតអាងកុំឌឺដងខ្លាំងពេកយើងខ្មែរយើងទុកឱកាសកុំបង្ខំចិត្តអញដើម្បីអញសម្រេចនៅអ្វីមួយអញចង់ធ្វើសូមផ្ដាំទៅទៀតម្ដាមហើយម្ដងទៀតយើងខ្មែរអ្វីដែលអញបានរៀបចំបន្ទាប់បញ្ចេញពីប្រទេសហ្នឹងទៅប្រទេសក្រៅវារួចសាច់ទៅហើយចង់ធ្វើឲ្យម៉ោងណាយប់បានយប់ថ្ងៃបានថ្ងៃម៉ោងជាមួយគ្នានឹងគ្រួសារទាំងអស់ទៀតទោះពួកអញអាចតបបាននៅក្នុងអ្វីនៅក្នុងក្រុមដែលនៅខាងស្មើជើងបើក្រុមរបស់មើលមិនឃើញនៅក្នុងរបស់មើលមិនឃើញហើយនឹងអាវុធជាផ្សះអញត្រូវប្រយ័ត្នចងចាំកន្លែងហ្នឹងអាសែនលមមបានហើយលើកមុនអញប៉ះជាមួយពួកអនណេលើកនេះខុសគ្នាអញដាំចារេអញបង្ហាញអញអត់ថ្ងៃស្លាប់ឯណាអញធ្វើអ្វីមួយដែលអញចត់ប្រកាន់អញព្រោះអញអាណិតអញនេះដែលអញភ្លឺអញប៉ុណ្ណឹងអីដែលអ្នករៀបចំហ្នឹងអ្នកខាងក្រោមតាំងពីខ្មោចអាសុកអាននេះទាំងអស់ដែលចំណែនអញបានដាក់ប័ណ្ណបញ្ជាយកលុយ3000លានដើម្បីទៅអភិវឌ្ឍហ្នឹងពីណាក៏ដឹងដែរហ៊ីងមហៀងក៏ដឹងបងអូនថ្លៃអញក៏ដឹងដែរអាការណាធឿនដឹងទាំងអស់មានអ្នកណាមិនដឹងទេចឹងបានសូមផ្ដាំកន្លែងហ្នឹងកុំអោយខ្លាំងពេកល្មមបានហើយអ្នកពិភពលោកខ្លាំងជាថ្ងៃ100ដងគេធ្វើកើតចុះទៅរកឲ្យប៉ុណ្ណាអញដឹងជ្រឹកខ្សោយទាំងអស់អញដឹងអ្វីទាំងអស់អញដឹងឯជ្រឹកខ្សោយរបស់យួនអញដឹងជ្រឹកខ្សោយរបស់ចិនដែលត្រូវការក្រុមអញសប្តាហ៍ថ្ងៃទៅទៀតអញបានទៅសេប្រាប់ឲ្យដែរព្រោះអញជាសំស្លឹកចេកដែលខ្ចប់នំសំពីវេលាដែលគេទុកប្រើអញទល់មិនទាន់មានអញតាមឆារីដល់មានអញគឺរឿងនេះវារឿងផ្សឹងតទៀតអញសូមផ្ដាំកន្លែងហ្នឹងល្មមបានហើយបើចង់សក់ដើម្បីកូនចៅអញរហូតចៅទូបានសក់ឃើញអញខំសរសេរនិពន្ធចម្រៀងដល់ដាស់ញ៉ាំងដែរទៀតទេអាសែនល្មមមកហាអាសែនកុំនៅតែចូលអួតខ្លាំងពេក
To all our brethren to receive the most merciful, the Grand Master.
I hold that to be self-evident, Brother Franklin. All men are created equal.
Indeed, Brother Washington. All Freemasons meet as equals, and we have an opportunity to create a nation in the very essence of Masonic morality. It would be wonderfully symbolic, don't you think?
You'll be wanting to put the all-seeing eye on our banknotes next.
You think I'm taking it a bit far?
Please don't ask me questions like that, Brother Franklin. You know I cannot tell a lie.
Oh, come on, Brother Washington. Everybody lies occasionally, surely, especially politicians.
Not me. Not even so much as an alternative fact.
We must all be aware of fake news.
But people must be free to think what they like as well. We can have no thought police in our new society. The foundation stone of our new nation built on all those principles that we hold dear.
The plans for our new capital city already have a very Masonic feel to them, yeah?
Candidate for initiation into the order, I'm giving him a little introduction into some of our mysteries. These two gentlemen are founding an entire nation built on our principles.
We have great promises for our new nation. You know, I wonder if other presidents after me will also be Freemasons.
Many will be. And Freemasonry will become embedded in the American culture. And the eye will appear on the banknotes.
Oh, God.
These principles will be honored with a gift from your French brethren. A gift that will be a welcoming beacon to the poor and oppressed.
This is the statue we are giving you.
It's a bit small, isn't it?
Oh, this is a maquette. The real thing is bigger. Much, much bigger. I call her Liberty Enlightening the World.
Catchy.
America will produce a great many great Americans from many different walks of life and many different fields, and many will be Masons. Sportsmen, actors, writers, soldiers, filmmakers, businessmen, inventors, astronauts.
What on earth is an astronaut?
No, they're not.
I don't follow.
Well, they're not on Earth, they're in space. In fact, Brother Buzz Aldrin was the second man to walk upon the surface of the moon.
Now, that's the best thing I've heard this evening.
What, that a Mason walked on the moon?
Man on the moon. Amazing. But don't forget the musicians. Do not forget the musicians.
Known as... That's rule of three again. The 3 degrees!
Freemasonry has burned as a blazing fire through the last 3 centuries.
As permanent master of these 3 lodges, I now call on my deputy masters.
Most Worshipful Grand Master, on behalf of the Brethren of Royal Somerset House,
Most Worshipful Grand Master,
our ceremonies and forever remind us of our incomparable heritage and the birth of organised Freemasonry,
stressing the deep and sincere loyalty and affection felt by the Brethren of the United Grand Lodge of England for their Grand Master.
We leave the Royal Albert Hall even more proud of our ancient institution.
Most Worshipful Grand Master, I humbly ask you to complete the initiation of this worthy candidate for Freemasonry.
I hereby read the text of a letter sent today to Buckingham Palace. May it please your Majesty, we, the representatives of over 200,000 Freemasons under the United Grand Lodge of England, most respectfully express our continuing loyalty to your Majesty's throne and person in this, the 66th year of your long and distinguished reign, to His Royal Highness the Duke of Kent, as our much loved and greatly respected Grand Master. We humbly thank God for preserving our order and fervently pray His blessings on your Majesty, so that our loyal devotion to your Majesty may long continue. Given at the Royal Albert Hall this 31st day of October, Anno Domini 2017. Her Majesty has been pleased to reply in the following terms. The Queen has asked me to thank you for your kind letter of royal greetings on behalf of the representatives of the Freemasons under the United Grand Lodge of England, which are being celebrated on the 31st of October at the Royal Albert Hall. Her Majesty appreciated your thoughtfulness in writing as you did.
I had the pleasure of meeting 136 Grand Masters visiting from overseas at Freemasons Hall yesterday. Today, though, we are a meeting of more than 4,000 gathered from all around the world, from our own constitution and beyond. When the global Masonic family comes together to celebrate our past and to renew our own pride and confidence in and enthusiasm for Freemasonry.
An advocate for the craft all over the world, continuing 3 centuries of distinguished royal tradition at the very heart of English Freemasonry.
To order, brethren! In order, brethren, to receive the most worshipful, the Grand Master.
Brethren, in a society as widely extended as Freemasonry, the branches of which are spread over the 4 quarters of the globe, it cannot be denied that we have many members who have travelled a great distance from east and west to be here today. As well as our own brethren from our overseas districts, we warmly welcome our home Grand Lodges and overseas visitors from 136 sovereign Grand Lodges around the globe, an extraordinary and fitting gathering of the Masonic family on this very special occasion. The United Grand Lodge of England is delighted to welcome to the Royal Albert Hall today the most worshipful Grand Master and brethren from the following Grand Lodges. The Grand Lodge of New Zealand, the Grand Lodge of Tasmania, the Grand Lodge of South Australia and Northern Territory, the Grand Lodge of Western Australia, the United Grand Lodge of New South Wales, the Grand Lodge of the Philippines, the Grand Lodge of India, the Grand Lodge of Russia, the Grand Lodge of Mauritius, the Grand Lodge of the State of Israel, the Grand Lodge of Armenia, the Grand Lodge of Greece, the Grand Lodge of Denmark, the regular Grand Lodge of Serbia, the regular Grand Lodge of Italy, the National Grand Lodge of Poland, the Grand Lodge of Congo, the Grand Lodge of Moldova, the Grand Lodge Alpina of Switzerland, the Sovereign Grand Lodge of Malta, the Grand Lodge of Slovenia, the Grand Lodge of South Africa, the Grand Lodge of Luxembourg, the Grand Lodge of Cameroon, the Grand Lodge of Lithuania, the Grand Lodge of Gabon, the Grand Lodge of Macedonia, the regular Grand Lodge of Belgium, the Grand Lodge of Nigeria, the Grand Lodge of Croatia, the Grand Lodge of Latvia, the Grand Lodge of Scotland, the Grand Lodge of Iceland, the Grand Lodge of Quebec, the Grand Lodge of British Columbia and Yukon, the Grand Lodge of Alaska, the Grand Lodge of Nova Scotia, the Grand Lodge of Minnesota, the Grand Lodge of Canada, Ontario, the Grand Lodge of Oregon, the Grand Lodge of Louisiana, the Grand Lodge of Maine, the Grand Lodge of Wyoming, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of California, the Grand Lodge of South Dakota, the Grand Lodge of Wisconsin, the Grand Lodge of New Mexico, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ontario, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Wisconsin, the Grand Lodge of Vermont, the Grand Lodge of Kansas, the Grand Lodge of North Carolina, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Nevada, the Grand Lodge of Connecticut, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of New York, the Grand Lodge of Indiana, the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of New Jersey, the Grand Lodge of Arizona, the Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia, the Grand Lodge of Cuba, the Grand Lodge of Prince Edward Island, the Grand Orient of Haiti, 1824, the Grand Lodge of Washington, the Grand Lodge of the State of Veracruz, the Grand Lodge of the Republic of Venezuela, the Grand Lodge of Ecuador, the Occidental Grand Lodge of Colombia at Cali, the Grand Lodge of Peru, the Grand Orient of Brazil, the Grand Lodge of Colombia at Bogota, the Grand Lodge of Bolivia, the Grand Lodge of the State of Espiritu Santo, the symbolic Grand Lodge of Paraguay, the Grand Lodge of the State of Sao Paulo, the Grand Lodge of Chile, the Grand Lodge of the State of Mato Grosso do Sul, the Grand Lodge of the State of Rio Grande do Sul, the Grand Lodge of Uruguay, the United Grand Lodge of Victoria, the United Grand Lodge of Queensland, the Grand Lodge of Japan, the Grand Lodge of China, Grand Lodge of Turkey, the United Grand Lodge of Bulgaria, the Grand Lodge of the State of Espirito Santo, the Symbolic Grand Lodge of Paraguay, the Grand Lodge of the State of Sao Paulo, the Grand Lodge of Chile, the Grand Lodge of the State of Mato Grosso do Sul, the Grand Lodge of the State of Rio Grande do Sul, the Grand Lodge of Uruguay, the United Grand Lodge of Victoria, the United Grand Lodge of Queensland, the Grand Lodge of Japan, the Grand Lodge of China, the Grand Lodge of Turkey, the United Grand Lodge of Bulgaria, the Grand Lodge of Finland, the Grand Lodge of Cyprus, the Grand Lodge of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Grand Lodge of Norway, the Grand Lodge of Estonia, the United Grand Lodges of Germany, the Grand Lodge of Sweden, the National Grand Lodge of Romania, the National Grand Lodge of Guinea, the National Grand Lodge of France, the Symbolic Grand Lodge of Hungary, the Grand East of the Netherlands, the Grand Lodge of the Czech Republic, the National Regular Grand Lodge of the Principality of Monaco, the Grand Lodge of Austria, the Grand Lodge of Ghana, the Grand Lodge of Slovakia, the Regular Grand Lodge of Portugal, the Grand Lodge of Burkina Faso, the Grand Lodge of Spain, the Regular Grand Lodge of the Kingdom of Morocco, the Grand Lodge of Ivory Coast, the Grand Lodge of Ireland, the Grand Lodge of Newfoundland and Labrador, the Grand Lodge of Alberta, the Grand Lodge of Michigan, the Grand Lodge of Montana, the Grand Lodge of Manitoba, the Grand Lodge of New Hampshire, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Nevada, the Grand Lodge of Colorado, the Grand Lodge of California, the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, the Grand Lodge of South Carolina, the Grand Lodge of Ohio, the Grand Lodge of Missouri, the Grand Lodge of Rhode Island, the Grand Lodge of Texas, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Colorado, the Grand Lodge of New York, the Grand Lodge of Virginia, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia, the Grand Lodge of Utah, the Grand Lodge of New Brunswick, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Kansas, the Grand Lodge of New Jersey, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Illinois, the Grand Lodge of Maryland, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Missouri, the Grand Lodge of Los Andes, the York Grand Lodge of Mexico. May we unite today, as always, in the grand design of being happy and communicating happiness.